One of our favorite things to do at Fervo is to take challenges and turn them into opportunities. The light bulb went on and it was like, if you do this, geothermal is truly scalable technology that's ready to go now. And that's one of the things that I really would like to talk about throughout this podcast is that, I think there is still this prevailing underbelly thought for folks that geothermal and advanced geothermal or enhanced geothermal is still sort of in the science experiment phase. AI isn't waiting, and neither is climate change. We need to accelerate the deployment and getting steel in the ground faster and streamlining approvals. I've heard the AI deployment referred to as an AI deployment arms race many times, and I really do think it is a defining moment of humanity and of our decade for sure. So no, they're not going to wait, and we don't really need to. We have the technology, we have the capital, we just need to get our ducks in a row so that the grid can be ready. But we also need to build smarter. We need flexible interconnection agreements. We also need to start treating clean energy as a critical infrastructure. We're finally stepping into the moment that it was made for.
Welcome to Geothermal Unleashed, where we will explore the cutting edge of geothermal energy. I'm Elizabeth Cambry from the Valorec New Energies team. I am here to help educate and document geothermal's rise in the global energy transition. Today, I am delighted to welcome Don Owens, the VP, Head of Development and Commercial Markets at Fervo Energy. Don, in my opinion, you have one of the most fascinating jobs in the geothermal industry. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today. So let's kick things off. And why don't you start by telling us what led you to the geothermal space and how did you get involved in Fervo?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of funny, actually. I got involved in energy because I hate being cold. So maybe I was destined to work in geothermal. I studied regulatory economics early on, then bounced around a bit, launched a small business with the Washington Post company, fueled by my espresso obsession in a coffee shop, and even worked in an ocean shipping company for a while using some of my Japanese. When that company tried to move me to Chicago during a recession, I opted out and took my severance and found myself in energy analytics. That was really my first step into the energy world. Originally, I worked in natural gas, but really everything changed when my son was born. I realized I couldn't keep contributing to a system that didn't align with the world that I wanted for him. That shift led me to sustainable energy, and a trip to Chiapas, Mexico really crystallized it. I participated in a native water ceremony, actually, and I made a personal commitment to use whatever skills I had to protect the planet. And that really still grounds me today. Later, through a mutual friend, I met Tim and Jack, and at the time, I was at East Bay Community Energy, obsessing over the duck curve since 2013, feeling increasingly uneasy about the future of clean energy. And as I sat there eating this very dry falafel sandwich, Tim shared Fervo's vision, and I had this visceral moment. Advanced, enhanced geothermal could eat the duck curve, and certainly faster than I was eating this dry falafel sandwich. That was it. I knew that the energy space and the markets, and even if I didn't know subsurface, I'd made a personal commitment, and I joined Fervo when it was just four of us. So that leap really brought me here today.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what Tim told you that Fervo's vision is for geothermal energy, and then has it morphed into anything more today, or is it still the same vision?
Yeah, I mean, it's only grown with power demand growing, but by and large, the vision is still the same. You know, what Tim had told me was, hey, have you heard of anything called geothermal? It's this nascent energy resource. I said, yes, I know the geysers, but I also know that you can't really scale it. And he said, yet. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, okay, let me tell you about this. And he talked about, the biggest development barriers that we have at the moment was really the bespoke nature of each individual hydrothermal resource and the dry hole risk, and how he explained to me the subsurface and how what Fervo is doing with our application of oil and gas technology, kind of creating our own geohydrothermal reservoirs and no longer needing to rely on that natural permeability of the earth. And, the light bulb went on and it was like, if you do this, geothermal is truly scalable and really is like a foundational piece of that totally carbon-free energy system. And the vision is still that what's changed is that where we thought that the demand would be for the product has just only accelerated with the power demand of AI.
So that's a great transition for me. I want to turn and I want to talk about geothermal and AI powered data centers. So, AI data centers have an urgent need for reliable, low carbon energy solutions. So, how is geothermal positioned to meet their growing demand without compromising speed?
The current speed mismatch for data and AI centers really is kind of a complex issue that is brought out by a lot of the development barriers and challenges that we are currently experiencing, not just for geothermal, but for all new energy. But one of the ways that geothermal can help is that we already have a 24/7 resource that's carbon free and a technology that's ready to go now. And that's one of the things that I really would like to talk about throughout this podcast is that, I think there is still this prevailing underbelly thought for folks that geothermal and advanced geothermal or enhanced geothermal is still sort of in the science experiment phase. And, we've actually shown that it isn't. We have wells, we have data, it's flowing. There's real projects in development now. And so that should no longer be a concern. And since this technology is ready to go today and is already meeting that 24/7, capacity factor need for AI, there is no reason for them to, sort of backslide and go to carbon resources if it weren't for these other development challenges, which, we should definitely talk about. We don't want to minimize those. Interconnection and some of these other barriers still definitely exist, but there's real things that we can do to address those.
Okay, so there was a recent report from the Rhodium group, and that was published in March. So can you share some of the highlights from that report?
There's been a lot of buzz lately about the rising electricity demand, and this report really confirms it. What's striking is that the data center electricity demand alone, largely driven by AI, is projected to increase by as much as 22% annually through 2030 under high growth scenarios. That's massive. But it really isn't just some vague forecast. I know we have a lot of talk these days about what's real and what's not. This report shows that even under more conservative growth path, data centers could account for 7 to 8 to 12% of the total electricity demand by 2028. And that's up from 4.5% in 2024. So yes, demand is accelerating and fast. But, the really exciting thing to me is that geothermal part and this report shows that the modeling around what the behind the meter enhanced geothermal systems or EGS can do in this context. The report finds that geothermal could economically meet up to 64% of that projected data center growth if siting continues just around the traditional data center clusters that we have already. But even more importantly, if data centers are sited based across to access the best geothermal resources, and we have this geothermal driven siting strategy, geothermal could meet 100% of that demand growth and do so at a cost that are 31 to 45% lower than in those traditional locations. So not only is geothermal a clean 24/7 power source, but it actually can be a lower cost option for meeting data center demand, especially when you pair it strategically with siting. That's a game changer, both for the decarbonization goals and for the economics of powering this AI arms race.
Okay, so you mentioned interconnection, and can you talk a little bit about what are the roadblocks when it comes to interconnection?
Yeah. One of the biggest roadblocks is simply the mismatch between how fast technology can move and how slowly the interconnection process works. Developers like Fervo can move really quickly. We can drill wells really quickly now using modern technology. We can build. Our supply chain is very quickly coming up to speed. It's already existed on the oil and gas side and on the surface side. Providers have been really quick to jump into that space. We're seeing the likes of GE, Baker Hughes, Turboden with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, all very interested in scaling up on the surface side. So, we've kind of like got all of these things ready to go, and we're just sitting around waiting for years to connect to the grid. The process is overly complex. It's often opaque. It's quite frankly not really built for the pace or the scale of energy development that's needed right now. So we're kind of dealing with outdated assumptions and planning cycles that just like really can't keep up with the speed of how quickly we're deploying projects and need to be deploying projects right now. Yeah.
So are there some states that are slower than others? And then what types of reforms could help accelerate the deployment of these interconnection needs?
Yeah. There are some states where deployment is overall slow, although what I will say is that interconnection is a problem nationwide, and there is definitely things that we can do. So, California ISO, for example, can't even accept new interconnection applications right now, and that means that like projects have been stuck in limbo for decades. Um, so we really need to reform the process from the top to the bottom, to be honest. First, there really has to be a shift towards proactive transmission planning, not just reactive to project proposals, which is by and large what we have right now. We have where people are sort of anticipating where clean energy is going to be built. There are some efforts around this, but we need to continue those. Second, we really need to streamline the queue itself. We need clearer timelines. We need faster study processes. The cool thing is that the thing that's creating the demand can also be part of the solution. There is a lot that AI can do around studying these very complex electrical interconnection processes and studies quicker. We also need a little bit more transparency on who's in the line and why. Some of that's already happening with FERC Order 2023, but we really need to go further to make it real ground. And then third, we really got to get serious about regional coordination. The grid, it's funny, you asked the question, you told me, which state. And it's funny, it's like the grid doesn't care about like our artificial boundaries and states. Like electricity doesn't respect whether you're in one state or another. So neither should our planning processes. We need better alignment along the ISOs and utilities and state regulators. And that alone can unlock a huge amount of capacity that's really just kind of stuck in this bureaucracy.
Okay, so there is a speed mismatch between the grid infrastructure and then this need for AI. I mean, if we don't solve this problem, are the data centers going to wait for us, for the geothermal space in particular?
No, I think they can't. I've heard the AI deployment referred to as an AI deployment arms race many times, and I really do think it is a defining moment of humanity and of our decade for sure. So no, they're not going to wait, and we don't really need to. We have the technology, we have the capital. We just need to get our ducks in a row so that the grid can be ready. It isn't just to build more like wires. We do need to do that, but we also need to build smarter. We need flexible interconnection agreements. We need grid enhancing technologies like dynamic line ratings. We need hybrid project structures that make better use of existing infrastructure. We also need to start treating clean energy as a critical infrastructure. That one is really, really key. And I think if you ask me what could the geothermal space do, since we are on Geothermal Unleashed and to truly unleash geothermal right now, we all need to be adding our voice to that clean energy needs to be critical infrastructures. If AI data centers and industrial loads are getting fast-tracked, then so does geothermal. It needs to be right there with them, being fast-tracked so it can power them. We need the political will to treat energy infrastructure with the same urgency as maybe like broadband or roads or water. That could help a lot.
Okay, so when you look at the interconnection queue, There are some projects that are speculative within that queue. So, how can stronger commercial readiness requirements create a more efficient interconnection process?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked about commercial readiness because this is like one of those double-edged swords for me. Okay, it's a huge issue. Right now, a lot of the projects in the queue are placeholders. And they may not be fully backed or financed or even real in some cases. And that does clog the system and it doesn't make it harder for viable projects to move. So I understand the intent of commercial readiness screens, like milestones for site control and signed offtake agreements and, demonstrated financing. But I actually want to talk about kind of the flip side of this, which is we just went through this massive queue reform to deal with these backlogs, which did strengthen those processes. But it actually is having some unintended consequences. It is making it harder for newer companies like Fervo that may not actually have the balance sheet to securitize for some of these high requirements for commercial readiness to submit interconnection applications for real viable projects. And so, I think that is a problem that isn't being talked about enough. While, we sort of created this process where, oh, we had too many unreal projects in the queue. So let's figure out which ones are unreal by just, if we tell people they have to post a lot of money, they will not put in these speculative projects. Well, now we're in this situation where even if every single project that was in the queue now was deployed, with those projections that we talked about earlier for AI demand, we kind of need everything, to be honest, to be deployed. So we really need to start talking about like, how do we sift through the queue now and find which projects are meeting the need as it exists today and ensure that those projects go through and which of these incentives work and don't work for that. So that's kind of what I meant more about like flexible requirements around interconnection.
Okay. All right, let's turn to the topic of financing and investment.
Sure.
What are the biggest financial hurdles facing the geothermal developers today? And how can the sector attract lower cost capital?
Okay. Oh boy. That is a very big topic. Okay. So, how can we attract lower cost capital? Let's talk about that. All right. So, geothermal's always had a bit of a capital mismatch, right? Upfront costs are really high, the timelines are really long. Many investors are used to shorter, especially when it comes to like solar or wind. And one of the biggest hurdles right now is that most geothermal companies, like newer entrants like us, don't have that revolving credit line. I'm going to just like harbor on that point, like just a
Okay.
little bit more, and then I swear I'm going to answer your question. But it's just because I want people to understand that that revolving credit line makes it really hard for new companies to bridge the gap between these early development costs and full-scale project finance, which we need both. So when you ask me a question about that, I immediately go to this. I really need those revolving credit lines so that I can do my sort of long lead time items. And then I also need project finance so that I can get to a full scalable thing. And we really need to attract low cost capital. Now getting to your question, the first thing we need is we need better risk understanding and data transparency. Our work with distributed fiber optics in our downhole, for example, really does help to reduce long-term risk over time. It gives us a lot more data that we've ever had in geothermal. And, in theory, that should translate to more confidence for lenders. But what we're finding is that we actually really need more education for those lenders so that they know and understand what that data means. And then the second thing that we need is we really do need like some standardization in how geothermal is underwritten. And that's one that I've just recently started talking about because one of the reasons that it is so hard for us to get that low cost capital and why solar has lower cost capital is, when I used to work at NRG, depending on what type of project you were working for, you sort of had like a very standard underwriting process. By contrast, geothermal, every single project is being treated like an exotic asset class. So there's more scrutiny on every single risk, which, given how traditional hydrothermal worked, that made sense. But now that we've moved and sort of totally radicalized this space to from sort of bespoke individual projects to predictable, scalable unitization, we really need to get to that like standard underwriting process so that it's easier for everybody to understand what is the true risk of geothermal and we can get capital, project capital deployed quicker. That shift is what's going to really unlock the scale that geothermal could truly be unleashed to.
So, are there any other creative financing solutions or partnerships that could unlock more opportunities for geothermal?
Well, should I keep talking about the revolving credit line?
Yes.
I it's so silly. I keep talking about that, but without that revolving credit, every project is like a fundraising campaign. And that's just really not scalable. If you're trying like every single project to be like on a fundraising campaign, you can't do that. That's what you really need to like take this pipeline, of which Fervo has a huge one, right? Like we have over
Yeah.
15 gigawatts of geothermal leasehold within our control now that we're like waiting today, like really anxious to deploy. And so we started looking at different things like blended capital models, combining private investment with government grants, loan guarantees, catalytic capital. But there's also a potential to look into some stuff on the customer side as well. We could have prepay agreements in our power purchasing agreements. This is something that, in particular, working with our load aligned partnerships like the big data centers and AIs are looking at with us, where we can, if in the absence of having that revolving capital for those early development costs, bringing some of the customers there if they're willing to co-invest, that's a potential creative solution. We're fortunate at Fervo that we've had some great partners like Google and others that have, kind of demonstrated a really willingness to come to the table and look at innovative solutions for us. But that's like some of the lessons that I think the broader capital markets could look to understand what they still need to evolve in order to, really truly launch this resource.
Okay, so I've just got a couple concluding questions, but let's
Okay.
look at a forward. So, what excites you most about the future of geothermal? Is very broad question, but
Yeah, that is a very broad question. Okay, I mean, other than the fact that it can eat that duck, which I can't wait to see, like the curve actually just eaten away. What excites me most about geothermal, honestly, is that we're finally stepping into the moment that it was made for. For decades, it's been this underutilized gem, firm, clean, 24/7 power, but it's really been held back by geography and outdated assumptions. And now, with enhanced geothermal, we've cracked open that map. We're no longer confined to California or Nevada or Iceland. It can be developed where the heat is and where the demand is, as we've seen in the Rhodium group. And we can do it fast. That demand from AI, electrification, electrical reshoring, it's real and it's changing the game. And everyone's looking around going, oh, what energy are we going to use? Is it reliable? Is it clean? Is it scalable? Oh no, we don't think we can find a clean one. But the reality is it's here. We're here. We're scaling it and we're doing it right now. Um, so what excites me is seeing it go from kind of like that science experiment that I talked about earlier to like an infrastructure movement. We have a chance to make geothermal like the backbone of a decarbonized, reliable power system that is fueling an AI-enabled generation that is just like that's the work of a generation.
I love that. Okay, so my final question is, how can industry players, policymakers, and investors collaborate to ensure geothermal becomes a cornerstone of sustainable energy?
Oh, yeah, we need alignment. We need alignment between those folks that you just talked about. We need policymakers to treat geothermal as critical infrastructure. I talked about that a little bit, but that includes streamlined permitting, transmission access, targeted support like loan guarantees or tax equity reforms. We want firm, clean power to have and create. If we want that clean, firm power, we have to create like a market that truly values it. And we also need alignment on investors. We need investors to get more comfortable with this asset class, and we're here to help them. We're not a science experiment anymore. We're also not a project that needs to be evaluated to each on a bespoke nature each individual time. We have data, we have PPAs, we have interconnection, even though that's difficult. We have wells that flow. But now we need capital that's patient enough to scale that new energy and creative enough, really, to structure the deals that fit with its profile. And then we need all of the geothermal industry players, many of which I'm sure are listening or watching this podcast, to collaborate, not compete in silos. When you're launching a new resource or new type of energy, this is not the time to sort of be fighting over the opportunity. We're going to need to decarbonize the grid by like hoarding or working in isolation. And hopefully Fervo has demonstrated that by being kind of radically transparent with those learnings, our early learnings. But we need to do that with one another. We need to share the risks. We need to share the successes. And if we do that, I really think that geothermal could be a cornerstone to the clean energy future, but really only if we treat it like one.
Well, Dawn, I want to thank you so much. It was truly an honor to have you on Geothermal Unleashed, and you had so many great insights. So thank you so much. And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us on this episode of Geothermal Unleashed. I hope today's discussion has sparked new insights and deepened your understanding of the geothermal industry's incredible potential. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and let's continue working together to unleash the full potential of geothermal.